Today's video does contain subject matter that some viewers may be sensitive to, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so, and thank you. When I was a freshman in high school, I was a bit of a troublemaker. I used to be the kid that would talk crap to the teacher, and then when they would try to send me out of the room, I would take that as an opportunity to go do whatever I wanted. I also skipped a lot of school, and was basically told that I had to go to summer school or else I was going to be held back. Being the kid I was, with a home life and parents that obviously weren't doing much to change the situation, I actually failed summer school. I was given a final ultimatum at that point. I was basically told that I was going to be expelled unless I attended what was essentially an alternative school in the district. For some reason, despite me being a problem child and pretty much being told that I no longer had to attend school if I chose expulsion, I decided that I wanted to do the alternative school. I don't know why I chose it, but I did. That alternative school was something else. There were a lot of people there that had done a lot of questionable things, and I was actually scared of a few of the people that were in my core classes. Strangely enough, when I started attending the alternative school, I kind of started caring about my grades and I wanted to do better. I also started making a few friends, including one girl that I will call D. D was a year older than me, but she was a bit out there. I don't know if she actually had a mental issue or if she was faking it, but I will say that she acted very bipolar. Most of the time she was fine, but she would randomly lash out and start screaming at people about things that made no sense. For example, there was one day during lunch where we were eating, and she got up to the table, walked to the table next to us, and started screaming at this one kid because he had, in her words, looked at her like he wanted to F her. The dude had no idea what was going on, and she threatened to smash his face in. She was pretty clearly not someone to mess with, obviously, but she was way too aggressive to people that did not deserve it. Now, the situation that this story is about actually happened near the end of the year. It was in our geometry class, which was one of the classes that semester that I'd had with D. We were in the middle of a quiz when she stood up and asked the teacher why she didn't know any of the answers. He asked her to please sit back down, and if she needed help, we could talk about the questions that she was stuck on as a class. She then started yelling that she didn't want to talk about it, and that we never learned any of the stuff that was on the quiz, and that the teacher was just making fun of her for being stupid. By this point, everyone was just kind of sitting there staring at her and the teacher was doing his best to calm the situation, asking her to please sit down, asking her to tell him which question it was that she was struggling with, and then, finally, after a bit of back and forth, asking her to come with him out into the hallway. He started walking toward the door, and as soon as he got to the door, Dee literally punched him in the side of the head, like full weight of her body forward, smacking his face into the wall and knocking him down. She then started kicking him in the head and neck. For a few seconds, we all just sat there and watched it happen. But then one of the kids in the back ran up and grabbed her, pulling her off of him, and yelled for someone to go get another teacher. Someone did, and thankfully this guy was able to hold Dee back and keep her pinned. They ended up calling an ambulance and the police. Dee was taken out of the school and subsequently expelled. The teacher was pretty badly messed up. One of her kicks to his head actually gave him an orbital socket fracture and cracked his jaw. Thankfully, that was the worst of it, and other than a lot of bruising, he was mostly okay. I have no idea what caused Dee to just snap like that, and it was super crazy to watch it all in real time. I do feel bad for the teacher, as he was just trying really hard to keep things calm, but she blew up in an instant. I never saw her again after that, but I assume she was probably charged and put in jail for a while because of the assault. If anyone else cares, I did finish high school. Of course, I was a year behind, but at least I got through it. When I was in high school, I used to be in a number of clubs and after-school things, including band. Because of this, I would typically be at the school until around 6 or 7 every night, unless there was a band recital going on, in which case I could sometimes be there until 10. I was the teacher's assistant, read as errand boy, for the band instructor. So every night that we had band practice or recital, or even a concert, I was the one that was designated to reorganize the back room and the classroom to make sure that everything was where it needed to be. I didn't really mind it. It was just a lot of work for me to do alone, especially cleaning up the back recital room, because I had to stack all the chairs and put away all the music stands into the side closet. And there was something like 50 of us in the school band. Most nights were fine, but there were a few times where I would swear that there was someone else in the back room with me. I would be putting things away and I would hear a chair move across the floor, which I'm sure most of you know that screech sound that it makes when metal scrapes across tile. I could hear it while I was stacking the chairs, and I would look over, but no one would ever be there. There was one night where I put all the stands away in the closet and shut the door, which was actually difficult. The door to the closet had an exterior latch, because it was one of those doors where, if you didn't hook the latch, it would swing open. I don't know if the school tilted or shifted or what, but they installed that exterior latch to hold it shut. I put all the stands away and I started stacking the chairs, and I heard the slow creaking sound of the closet door slowly swing open. As soon as I looked over at the cabinet, the door slammed shut, like someone was standing there and threw it shut as hard as they could. When I finally got the courage to go check it out, I noticed that it was staying shut without the latch. It didn't last long, though. I opened it and reshut it, and it immediately went back to slowly swinging open. The creepiest event was actually in my senior year, when I was pretty much done with everything. I would spend a lot of my evenings in the band room studying because I didn't really have much else to do, and it was kind of like my comfort zone after having spent 4 years in it. I was sitting there one night, and I started hearing footsteps in the back room. At first I thought it was the instructor, but after he didn't walk out, I went to go check to see if he needed help with anything. I opened the door, and to my surprise, the instructor wasn't there. But I swear I saw what looked like a person around my age sitting in one of the chairs in the back row. Like, I seriously saw a person around 17, dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, with long black hair just sitting in one of the chairs. I did one of those blinking double takes, and she was gone. I don't know who she was, and I don't think anyone has died in the school, and I don't really see any reason as to why it would be haunted by someone that looked like a student. But then it kind of clicked that she was likely the spirit that liked to play tricks on me. That was the only time that I ever saw her, and it was actually the last time I had any sort of paranormal experiences there. The last 2 to 3 weeks were kind of boring. I was almost hoping to see her one last time before I left, but it didn't happen. I don't know if it was the spirit of someone that had passed away a long time ago, or why she was connected to the school, but I never really felt like she was malicious in her intent. The things that happened were creepy, sure, but it almost felt like she was playing a prank on me. And she kind of looked like the type to do it, which sounds kind of weird when you're describing a spirit. Anyways, that's my story of when I was in high school and was scared several times by a spirit. I do hope that she found peace eventually, or if she just never wanted to leave, then I hope that her spirit was at least comfortable in the band room. I used to teach high school way back, and while it was mostly uneventful, there was one time where things went pretty bad, and I'll never forget what happened. I was an English teacher for freshmen, which, for those that aren't used to the high school nomenclature, I was teaching ninth year students, which are kids that are around 14 or 15 years old at the most. I don't know if they use the same labels outside the US, so I figured it would be helpful to explain. Teaching kids that age meant that you are dealing with a lot of really dumb and dramatic things. These are really young kids that are doing their best to figure out what life actually is, and they're on the cusp of that adulthood transition, where things fall into place. So, you can't really blame them for their mistakes, or when they do something stupid. That's not to say that they are without fault, just that when they do something, it is hard to pin blame on them fully, as they tend to emulate what they see outside of their own lives. They also tend to try and be cool, and they have no idea what cool actually is. This story involves two young girls that I'm going to call Katie and Kylie. These two young ladies were in the group of people that really wanted to be cool kids, but were definitely on the outside looking in, which is a common thing, and there's nothing wrong with not being in that clique. The two of them were both smart girls, but they were also beginning to hit that phase where being smart wasn't what they wanted. So, they started lashing out and pushing back against authority. The two of them were in my class that I had immediately after lunch, so they would be in my room right after eating. I never really had much of a problem with either of them until this situation occurred. They were both good students and they both did their work to an acceptable degree. The day that this event happened was pretty normal, until it wasn't. We were doing the standard normal assignment that I had them do at the beginning of class, when I glanced over and saw that Katie looked a bit out of it. At first, I thought maybe she was just tired or bored. But then I noticed that she looked a bit pale, and like she was going to get sick. I stood up and walked over to her and asked her if she was okay, and she seemed like she wasn't really able to respond to me. She sort of glanced over but didn't really say anything. I knelt down and tried to talk to her again, but she was completely not there. Her eyes were glazed over, and she looked like she was barely breathing. At that point, I knew that something was going on with her. I told one of the other students to run next door to the health class and get the teacher, because we had a medical emergency. They were a certified nurse, and I figured that they could help. I was trying to get Katie to focus and was trying to talk to her, but it was not happening. Obviously, my class was freaking out a bit, and I was panicking inside, but I didn't want to step away from her just in case she collapsed until the other teacher got into the room. After a moment, she ran in asking what was going on. I explained the situation and she told me to call 911. I ran over, and picked up the phone, and right about the time I got to the operator, Katie just fell over unconscious. There are several minutes in this situation where I really don't remember all of what happened. I remember telling the operator everything, and the other teachers starting CPR and doing everything to keep Katie breathing and alive. But between that and the paramedics shoving into my room and taking her away, I don't recall much. I won't go over too much of what happened after this, because there was a lot of paperwork I had to do and a couple of meetings with the administration that I had to have that aren't really relevant, but I will explain what all actually happened. I will start by saying that Katie did survive this event, but barely. From what I've been told about this, she was teetering over the edge for most of the ambulance ride, and it took them a while to bring her back to a conscious and living state. As for how she ended up like that, we actually figured this out pretty quickly, because Kylie spoke up when the paramedics had taken Katie away and the principal had come down to the classroom. Apparently, Katie had decided that, in order to be one of the cool kids, she and Kylie needed to do drugs. However, neither of them knew what drugs they should or could do, so she just decided to swipe a bottle of pills from the medicine cabinet. The pills in question were decently strong pain pills that her mother had from when she had broken her arm or something like that. Katie had taken them, and during the lunch break, she and Kylie went to the bathroom to take them. Kylie took one because she didn't like swallowing pills, apparently. Katie, on the other hand, had taken a handful of them because she, in her words, wanted to really feel it. Like I said, these were kids just trying to figure things out, and apparently neither of them had ever been told about overdosing or what happens. When they got to my class, Kylie was fine for the most part, just kind of tired. Katie, on the other hand, was getting hit by the medication really hard, and that's why she went pale. Her body was pretty much shutting down. Katie came very close to accidentally dying that day. Kylie nearly lost her best friend, and I almost lost a student because she thought it would be cool to take a handful of pills that she was ignorant about. They were able to get her stable, and she did eventually get to come back to class. Though, when she came back, she was a completely changed person. For the better, of course. I think the fact that she almost accidentally ended her own life really affected her, as it would anyone. I'm thankful that she didn't die, obviously, but I will honestly never forget that day. The look on her face, the absolute terror in Kylie's voice when she told us about the pills. So, I ask everyone out there, please make sure that your children are fully aware of the dangers of medication, and keep things like prescribed pain pills far away from your kids, if possible. I didn't lose a student that day, but if I had, it would have been the most devastating thing for not just myself, but those kids, the staff, and her parents. I have a creepy story that actually happened to me and a buddy back when we were sophomores in high school. This was after a few major events had happened, and our school was actually one that had a threat phoned into it at one point. And while they didn't follow through, nor was it credible, everyone that attended and worked at the school had a certain level of paranoia instilled in them. And while we weren't sitting around expecting a lockdown or something bad to happen, we all knew what to do if it did. Well, in my sophomore year, we actually had a lockdown that happened, and it was seriously terrifying. One of the reasons that it was so scary for me and my buddy Pete was because we were actually in the restroom when the sound came over the speaker for the lockdown. We had drills for lockdown in the school, and we had been given information on what we were supposed to do when they call the lockdown. But the problem is, the drills and information tell you to go to the nearest classroom. Like I had mentioned, Pete and I were actually in the restroom at the time. We were both in our stalls when, out of nowhere, we heard, "The building is now on lockdown. All staff and students follow lockdown procedures. This is not a drill." I could hear Pete's breathing start to get heavier, and I'm pretty sure he was hitting panic attack levels when he heard the call out. I whispered to him from my stall that he needed to stay calm and stay quiet. He said that we needed to get out of the bathroom and to get into a classroom, but I told him that that wasn't a good idea, as it could be unsafe in the hallways. It did kind of dawn on me when I said that the restroom was probably just as unsafe, but at least there was a door that blocked it. I mentioned to him that we should go sit by the door to stop it from opening, and he agreed. We both exited the stalls and went over to the door and just kind of sat there. Something about this whole situation was actually pretty creepy. Just sitting on the bathroom floor to block the door just in case an intruder were to enter the bathroom. The fact that there was an intruder in the first place. Something about the fact that someone was in the school that shouldn't be, and we had no idea if they had a weapon or a gun or something. It was the scariest thing I had ever had to deal with. There was one point that I had actually opened the door slightly to look out into the hallway so I could see if anything was going on. And I'm pretty sure that I saw the person that caused the lockdown. It wasn't some gun-toting maniac. It just kind of looked like a homeless guy. Obviously, he shouldn't have been in the school, but I did feel a little less scared with the whole thing, though I probably shouldn't have. A few moments after I had seen the man in the hallway, I started hearing what sounded like loud and angry screaming. I assumed it was the man in the hallway because he was screaming something incoherent. And when I say incoherent, I mean complete nonsense. I'm pretty sure he said something about the students there were trying to kill him, and that he needed to kill all of us first. And then I heard what sounded like banging on a door, and the continuation of his ramblings. This guy was pretty clearly insane. Not much longer after that, I heard police screaming to get on the ground, and then someone shouting taser. Obviously, they hit him with the taser to get him, and I could hear him continuing to scream as he was being zapped. I had to calm Pete down while this was happening, as he was a bit of a panicky kid, which was fine. It was better that he and I ended up in the restroom at the same time, as he probably would have had a full-on panic attack without me there. About 20 minutes after the whole incident happened, there was another announcement stating that we would remain on lockdown until the officers had cleared all of the rooms. Then, about 10 minutes later, an officer started to open the door and hit me with it. I think we actually scared him when we jumped up, because he started reaching for his weapon as it happened. We both shouted that we were both students. He came in and asked if it was just us, and then he peered in and told us to get out of the restroom and to get to class. We did. We went as quickly as we could to the classroom that we were supposed to be in, and I will say that our teacher was not happy with the fact that we weren't in there when the lockdown was called. Based on what I had heard from some other students at the time, this guy was apparently some homeless dude that had lied to the receptionist about why he needed into the school. He had told her that his son was in the nurse's office because he was sick, and there was, unfortunately, one student that was in with the nurse that was waiting to be picked up. I'm not sure how she could have believed him, as, like I said, he looked kind of scraggly and homeless. Anyways, he had apparently walked into the school, and instead of going towards the office, he started screaming his strange ramblings at the staff. And he did actually have a decent-sized knife on him. That was when they called the initial lockdown. Thankfully, it was just a knife, and thankfully we had all been prepared with what to do to some extent. And while Pete and I kind of dropped the ball, we were okay in the end. It may not sound as creepy to some people, but I think that being in that situation is what made it so terrifying. Just sitting there, unsure of what was going on or what was going to happen, and not knowing whether or not this was going to end in bloodshed. I'm glad it didn't, and I'm glad that I never had to deal with anything like that again, but it still scared the living hell out of both myself and Pete. When I was in middle school, we had a handful of elective classes that we could take that were pretty 101 level basic stuff. There was a computer and tech class, home ec, and then there was what was known as industrial arts, which was more or less a shop class. These weren't all of them, but these were the ones that I personally remember. My first year of junior high, I took the computers and tech class, and then the second year I decided that I wanted to see what shop class was all about. The class started out well enough. The teacher went over everything involved in the class and what he expected of us. He then went over all the machines and tools that we would use. He was very detailed and thorough when it came to explaining for each of the machines and how they worked. He even had a demonstration for the bandsaw. When it came time for him to explain how the bandsaw worked, he walked over to his office and grabbed a raw chicken leg. He then turned the saw on. It was a good demonstration, honestly. Watching the saw blade rip open the chicken leg and tear through the meat and bone definitely got the point across that this was not a toy. My point in all this is that he was a very safety-oriented teacher. He was excellent at showing what could go wrong, and he watched all of us like a hawk when we were working on our projects. When the event happened, we were actually in the second quarter of the class. We were on our third or fourth project, and I actually remember that we were supposed to be designing a small wooden race car from a block of wood. We had some specific requirements that we had to use, like how much of the wood we could or couldn't cut off. Pretty basic stuff. One of the final parts of the project required us to drill 2 holes into the bottom for the axles. On the specific day that this happened, our teacher was actually out sick. However, his son was a substitute instructor for the district, so they called him in to take his place, which on paper sounds like a great idea. The problem with that is that his son was absolutely not as mindful of the fact that we were all dumb kids. And he was a lot more relaxed when it came to monitoring us. The problem with that is that we did have a couple of boys in the class that were absolute a-holes and were just waiting for the moment to do something stupid for attention. The 2 of them were actually cousins that had grown up together, and in their early teenage years, they had made it a point to torment each other for fun. For the sake of the story, we're going to call them E and M. On this specific day, they were supposed to be drilling the holes into their cars, but E had the bright idea that he wanted to play chicken with the drill press. He bet M that he could put his hand on the drill's press and get the bit closer to his hand before chickening out than he could. M, not to be made a fool of, accepted the bet, and the 2 of them set off on their stupidity-filled game. E placed his hand on the press plate and lowered the bit to just above his hand, and held it there for several moments before lifting it back up, and then laughing at M in a taunting manner. M, of course, said that he could do better, and he placed his hand on the drill press plate and slowly started lowering the bit down. This is where things went from stupid to medical emergency in record time. M was sitting there lowering the bit close to his hand as slowly as he could, and was just focusing on the space between the quarter-inch bit and his palm. However, E decided that he wanted to, I don't know, be funny, I guess, and scare M by nudging the lowering mechanism and trying to get it to hit his hand and scare him. I'm really not 100% sure what his plan was in this situation. But when he hit the lowering mechanism, he hit it way too hard in a downward motion, and the drill bit ended up going straight into M's hand. The way I see it, this had to have been intentional, because it was almost like E had pushed the lowering handle down way harder than he should have, and the only way for a drill bit to go through like it did would have been with pressure. This, of course, caused M to freak out and push the lowering mechanism up, which lifted his hand to the top of the machine, which then caused him to try and pull his hand off, which made the whole thing worse. This whole time, M is screaming about the literal drill bit that had gone through his hand, front to back. At no point did E press the emergency stop button, or do anything to actually try and stop the machine. The teacher ended up running over to shut it off and asked what the hell had happened, and was screaming to someone in the room to go to the desk and call 911 and tell them that we needed an ambulance. The whole thing was incredibly disgusting. I'm not going to go into the detail of it here, but I do remember that it was a bloody mess. The drill bit had actually gone through the center of his hand, and he was losing a lot of blood. And the teacher was doing everything he could to keep M from passing out and losing too much. At the end of this whole thing, E ended up getting expelled. And obviously everyone in the school knew about what had happened. He claimed it was an accident, and that while they were playing chicken, he didn't mean to hit the press. We all knew it was a lie, but M ended up vouching for him, saying that it was an accident. M actually ended up losing use of half of his left hand and was out of school for quite a while. Apparently where the bit had gone into the hand was a bad spot for it to do so, and it damaged a lot. He couldn't really move his ring finger or pinky anymore, and this was honestly a really traumatic event for a lot of us as middle schoolers, and was enough to pretty much shut down the shop class for us for the rest of the year. From then on, anytime one of us wanted to use the machines, we had to do it one at a time with the teacher watching us. It slowed down the projects a lot, but honestly, I get it. I guess the moral of my story is that kids can be evil to even their own family, and power tools like drill presses are not something you should play around with. Also, playing chicken with a drill press is probably one of the dumbest things you could ever do. Back when I was a very young kid in elementary school, we actually had a full school lockdown that I can remember. And I remember that it was really scary and confusing when we were locked down, because we were all little kids and had no idea what was going on. I was either in 5th or 6th grade at the time, because it was definitely near the end of me being in elementary school. To start the story, I will mention that I grew up in a rather poor area of my town, and the school that I attended was definitely not in the best location either. At the time that this took place, it was essentially the start of gang activity in my town. I know that sounds weird, but it was pretty much a situation where people were starting to create gangs or starting to create their own sect of existing gangs. It's kind of hard to explain, honestly. It's like there were no gangs in the area, and then one day there were. Anyways, on the day that this happened, things felt rather normal. My grade was outside at recess, and I was actually playing kickball with a group of friends. About halfway through recess, I remember seeing a group of guys that were walking down the street towards the corner where the school was, but not necessarily near or to the school, just on the same street. I thought nothing of it. They were just people to me, and I was like 11 or 12, so I didn't really care. I remember that I was up to kick, and I kicked the ball for a double, and as soon as I started running to the base, I heard a loud pop. And then the teacher blowing the whistle really loud and waving frantically for everyone to get inside. Obviously, I was upset. I finally get a good kick in, and then recess had to end. But something was off about this. We were all walking inside to the building, but the teachers had that weird sense of urgency when they were ushering us in. They were telling us to go faster, telling us to get into the rooms right away, and as soon as we were in, the teacher started taking attendance really quickly and locked the doors. Well, come to find out, we ended up on a full-blown lockdown. We were all pulled out of our desks and sat behind the teacher's desk while she went on with the lesson. I remember feeling really weird being told to sit on the floor in the back while we did math. But it was definitely their way of keeping us all collected and away from doors and windows. The overall story was that it was actually a gang shooting. Those guys were meeting up with another group to fight it out for the territory or something, and one of them pulled out a gun, which led to a small firefight. That loud pop was one of the first shots, but definitely not the only shot. While we were sitting there on the floor doing multiplication, they were shooting at each other on the corner until the cops got there, and by then 2 of them had actually been hit and killed. As a kid, I remember just being told that there was a fight outside, and that's why they had us all come in. But I learned that it was actually a shootout when I was an adult, and my mom accidentally told me about the 2 guys that were killed outside of my school. This was the only time I ever had to go into a lockdown, thankfully, and while the town I grew up in hasn't really improved, the gangs at least stay away from the schools now. So that was today's collection of school stories. Creepy school stories, however you want to look at it. Stories that happen around or in a school. I think they're all in a school actually this time, so. Definitely some terrifying stories. In my opinion, the overall feeling of these stories is kind of devastating. These stories are people who are young and trying to figure themselves out, going through terrible events for the most part. Something's unavoidable, something's avoidable, but in the end, I think it's the connection to real life and the relatability that makes these stories so terrifying. So thank you to everyone who sent them in and anyone who lets me use their stories, as well as those who do listen to this point. I've always said my creepy encounter stories are educational, but I think these kind of are too. So, anyways, if you did enjoy the video, please do hit that thumbs up button. And if you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as I do this quite often, these stories, these videos. You can also leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with anything like this whenever you were in school? I dealt with some stuff, but nothing really like this, so I can't give you guys a story of mine that it relates to these, but if you have one, please do, consider sending it my way if you're comfortable doing so. I wouldn't mind doing another collection like this in the future, if there's an option to do so. So, all that said, friends, thank you so very much. I do hope you're all having a beautiful day, and I do hope I see you on the next video. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be, and you should never let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I do see you again, friend, I hope that you sleep well.